By going back in time, Secret of the Mimic gave us a look into the sordid history of Freddy's along with some of the early iterations of fan-favorite characters. We have the Jug Band featuring Jug Band Monty, Hippo, and the Frogs, which are early versions of Monty Gator, Mr. Hippo, and Happy Frog. We have First Mate Foxy before he got his promotion, and two Roxys, the double eye-patched Foxy crew member and the Western Roxy mascot for her Rootin' Tootin' Root Beer. But surprisingly, another fan-favorite character gets a backstory and an early interpretation: the Daycare Attendant. The origin of the Daycare Attendant, or Sun and Moon, was one I was, half expecting. I mean, it's hard to ignore the many Sun and Moon motifs littering Murray's costume manor. The game's been out for 2 weeks, I keep trying to call it Murray's Mascot Manor. But I was surprised how it came together. Not in a reference alone, not as a prop hidden in a room, but in one sentence which answered the question of where Sun and Moon came from with another question. What? Don't believe me? You thought I was just going to be talking about Sleepy Moon, didn't you? Well, I will be, but good grief, if that isn't just the tip of the crazy iceberg that formed due to one line. One line that we'll get to, but first, let's start at the beginning. Well, no, the end. The beginning of the Daycare Attendant story actually takes place at the end, so let me put it on fast forward. The Daycare Attendant works at the Superstar Daycare and the Mega Pizzaplex in Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach. He is a day and night themed jester with two distinct personalities. Sun is anxious, fussy, and overwhelmed, but an attentive caretaker when he's not panicking over nap time. Moon is an aggressive gremlin, constantly trying to put kids down for a very forceful nap. Sun and Moon are in a constant battle with each other, and throughout the game, shift upper hand as Sun tries to keep the lights on and Moon tries to keep the lights off, as that's what causes them to switch. However, they are not entirely separated, with a frustrated Sun's voice sometimes sounding more like Moon, and Sun referring to Moon as the other me. He fears him, while Moon is in such a state of fixation that we don't know what he thinks or feels other than, "It's time for your nap!" That didn't sound anything like Moon, you get the feel. The Tales from the Pizzaplex books claim that Sun and Moon are part of a theater bot that was repurposed for the daycare, that Moon is evil, and it was never fixed. Though it's unclear if this backstory is for one specific Sun and Moon or all of the Suns and Moons, since there's multiple Pizzaplexes with repeat characters. It seems to make sense, except, and there are two big excepts. The first one being that as of Secret of the Mimic, it is clear that the games and books are not 1-to-1 100%. Not a big surprise if you know about the Silver Eyes trilogy's same but different connections to the games, where some stuff is the same and some stuff isn't. But there's some huge differentials in the story of the Mimic, so things have changed. The other except being that even in Security Breach and Ruin, the Daycare Attendant's background doesn't line up with the books. In Tales they say that the Moon was always evil, but in Ruin, Cassie mentions that she used to love the daycare and slept well during nap time, implying the Moon wasn't always this aggressive. Then Help Wanted 2 reveals that Moon is under Vanny's control, so unless Vanny existed as long as the Sun and the Moon did at the Pizzaplex, that wouldn't quite make sense. There's at least some reasonable evidence that the whole Moon was always evil thing might not be entirely correct. But of course, we don't actually know. So in short, the backstory for Sun and Moon has purposefully been left a little obscure, and with Secret of the Mimic having so many references to Security Breach and characters from it, there seemed to be a good chance to get something here. First of all, it seems before Sun and Moon were Sun and Moon, there was a singular character just named Moon, or Sleepy Moon. Sleepy Moon is portrayed as a round moon with jester-themed dark blue legs and arms, and a little nightcap perched atop his giant head. And from his slippers to the ribbons to the bells around his wrists, we can see the resemblance to Sun and Moon, solidifying his place as their ancestor, character-wise of course. He glows a warm yellow, but with the emissions off he appears as sort of whitish-gray lilac with pink lips. Sleepy Moon appears on posters throughout the factory. Though they don't expressly say what they're advertising, he seems to be the mascot of the Storytime showroom. Indeed, there used to even be a giant moon globe that ended up collapsing and taking out the showroom in the process, which is why it's left in disrepair and closed off by time of Secret of the Mimic. The globe now sits in the basement. But it's not alone. There isn't a Sleeping Moon animatronic, but there is a mascot. But it's not just your usual mascot. Built to be worn by a human, but in a way that makes it look more like something that could have come out of Saw. We can see blueprints of it around the factory, though I remember it best from being on the walls of the doll hospital. The suit is comprised of a round shell that splits open along the side to let the wearer in. The wearer's legs slide into Moon's and are held apart by the shell, leading to his widespread gait, while the arms are entirely internal, holding onto posts that connect with the outside arms. It's a suffocating looking suit, where the majority of it is large and unwieldy, swallowing up the wearer. I've seen some people say that it's a spring-lock suit, and I thought it was for a while. It doesn't specifically say it's a spring-lock suit, but with how the body's fitted, with the shape and the sphere, it could very well actually be a spring-lock suit, and that's how it's able to keep its shape. I just don't know for sure. But there's something much more unnerving about the Sleeping Moon. There seems to currently be only one of them, and it's hidden deep under the factory. In the basement where the moon globe fell through, underneath the Storytime showroom and the theater above that, there lurks the moon, singing in a low voice and jingling as it walks through the dark.
Lullaby and good night, with roses bed light, with lilies o'erspread, his baby's wee bed. Lay thee down now and rest, may thy slumber be blessed. Lay thee down now and rest, may thy slumber be blessed. Shh. Shush.
It is aggressive, and if it sees you, it will charge up and jump scare you with the little dance. But you must move this starlight bright nightlight doll around to activate different sections of the power to collect pieces for the power puzzle attached to the globe. So you are forced to wander around in near darkness through a maze with this moon following at your heels, with hanging chains everywhere, waiting to give away your location, and when they do, he will find you. Now, you would think this is just the mimic, but there's actually a couple of logs that suggest a much more disturbing truth. One worker writes, "Sean, I found out why they closed it down. Assumedly the Storytime showroom. There's something below us. I've trapped it behind the carousel for now, but I don't know how long that can hold it. I've programmed the monitors to give you the code. I gotta go. I'll mail you later." He then mails a slew of hints along with one final log. There you have it. Just don't use the code unless it's a matter of life or death. Have mercy on our souls if that thing ever gets out. So it seems the employees were aware of and frightened of this moon mascot, and this might have held back the repair work on the Storytime showroom. Except, there is another message that reveals something very unsettling. It's called Night Shift, and it reads, Hey, is anybody up there? I'm stuck down here. The elevator isn't working and I'm getting really hungry. Is anyone getting this message?" It seems to have been sent by an employee who was stuck in that same basement area. Notably, he doesn't mention a moon wandering around or hearing anything. He just mentions the elevator not working. Likely because to access the security office down there, he would have had to have the nightlight star plugged into a separate circuit. You can't have the security office door open and the elevator working at the same time. Indeed, looking at the tiny security office, we can see where it looks like someone tried to sleep on the couch. There's a tiny fridge, and that the monitor doesn't have service, which is why it can't connect to the map. The mail didn't go anywhere. So where is this missing employee? Well, it could be that the moon waddled up in and killed him, but also, being that it's a mascot suit, that could be him. He could have gone mad and climbed into the moon, or more likely, since we don't know how long he's been down here, he could have died in that suit. And the moon is the possessed suit shuffling around in the darkness, held up only by his body. Notably, the worker doesn't say how he got down there, with this hole being under both the Storytime showroom and the theater having its man by one guy in a spring-lock suit shows. It's possible he fell down there in the suit, surviving the fall because of the suit, and then was stuck. And then, when he was spotted by a worker, they freaked out and locked the place up before seeing what it actually was. Recall in game, Arnold falls through the dilapidated theater in a spring-lock suit and survives, so it's not too surprising it could happen a second time, even if it's not a spring-lock suit because the shell could have taken most of the impact. In which case, what a horrific tragedy. Some guy's just doing his job, falls into the basement, and then some other guy gets a wild hair and just locks him down there, makes this elaborate code and tells exactly one person before he dips. Then we have this worker stuck down there for God knows how long, with nothing more than a dinky little security office to try to survive in, until he likely starves, and this is assuming that he can actually get the suit off on his own. Remember, this Moon mascot has a side split, and the arms are stuck inside. He could have been properly screwed in this thing. It's horrifying, really. It's very disturbing. There is another log that says, "Haven't seen Gary. I'm going to check the theater. Found some films and I knew he wanted to get the projector up and running." This Gary could be the employee in the basement, but there's also 2 bodies located in the theater, shoved in the suit, so it could also be one of them. There is also the theory that the person in the sleeping moon is Edwin. In case you don't know, the mimic, M2, blew him up at his house and left him for dead. So this would mean that either M2 came back and claimed Edwin's body to stuff into the moon, or that Edwin somehow survived and M2 did the same thing. You could say that's why there's no body outside of Edwin's house, but I'd say time and censorship likely explains Edwin's missing body easier. It wouldn't be as easy to cover up as like a singular arm sticking out of a mascot. Though there does seem to be like a lump of dirt out there that's probably a rock or texturing thing. The real hinge for the Edwin is sleeping moon idea is that the sleeping moon has his voice actor. Credible. But he is doing a different voice. And also that Edwin stands in for the moon in the Moon.exe game, which we're about to get into, because that's the hinge for the Daycare Attendant's origin. Personally, I don't think the sleeping moon mascot is Edwin, because I don't think the message about someone being stuck down there would have been there if it didn't mean anything. And like I said, it doesn't mention that he hears anything. If he said something like, "I hear jingling, I don't think I'm alone down here," it would be an entirely different story. But either way you cut it, that's a very, very disturbing implication. I can only imagine how awful it must have been to wake up in that office day after day, alone and hungry, and know there's nobody coming to get you, and nobody entering the Storytime showcase to call to. Absolutely grueling. But on a lighter note, let's get into Moon.exe, a game about resurrecting a dead child. Moon.exe starts out as a simple text adventure, but soon reveals what it's really all about. Required for getting the secret ending and making up the code that is used to convince the mimic that it's David in that ending, Moon.exe involves you trying to escape the moon, assist the sun, meet a friendly baby owl, and, well, turn the mimic into David. You need all of the collectibles to finish the game, if I recall right, and once dumped in the inventory, they will appear in-game, either to help or just lend some lore tidbits. The game is filled with references to Edwin, Fiona, David, their family, their deaths, and so on. Moon is very early on established to be a stand-in for Edwin. Moments such as, if you enter the cave without the baby owl's mask, Moon says, "Not now, I'm too busy, back to bed." That busyness lining up with how Edwin often dismissed David by saying he was busy or working. M2 even mocks him about it. Moon also saves you if you drink the poison soup, showing that he is not evil. When you wear the baby owl mask, which is David's mask, I'll explain it later, the moon begins to cry. Sun is a stand-in for Fiona. This is quite literal, as her design is the one Fiona uses when you find her box, but it's also heavily hinted in-game as well. At the desk in-game, there's a letter that asks to bring the sun back, likely David asking for his mother to come home, which matches up with, like, David's birthday recording, where he has not gotten over Fiona's death. And also, the quest to bring back David, it's all very literal. So basically, you wake up in a kid's bedroom, which likely isn't yours. Well, I mean, it's implied to be David's, boarded up and all, and you aren't David. Help an old woman get harassed by the moon, dress up in an owl mask, go into a cave, and find a broken statue that looks like a jester with 2 brightly colored legs. In the upper sections, you find 2 arms and a moon-shaped head and put it together. Now it looks almost like the daycare attendant, just only the moon. The moon statue sings and is reborn. It glows, and you white out. Suddenly, you're inside Murray's. The game mentions a workshop with machines to never stir again, broken ruins and buildings, and now you are seeing what it truly is. The costume manor itself. Walking up to Mr. Helpful, he kindly explains, "You rebuilt yourself, but now you are split in 2. Moon and sun, destruction and life." I'm sorry, game, but what does that mean? What does that mean? What, we became the sun and moon and split into the sun and moon? And not the Edwin and Fiona moon and sun, because Fiona's sun is still around. They were already there, so we, not him, not them, not it, we, you, became the sun and moon. Huh? This seemingly throwaway line, along with, rebuilding the moon into a familiar face, definitely seems to be directly saying something, but what it's saying is just a little, nonsensical. Well, let's be blunt, it's literally saying that you are split in 2, sun and moon. Maybe we rebuilt moon, maybe, but Mama Sun is still there. She appears at the end. Let me finish here. You face Jackie, Big Top, Dolly, and Chica, make it to David's room, put his toys together, upgrade your data driver, and son Fiona says, "Now you will get your reward. Use this to bring him back. It's all in your hands now." Everything you've been doing is to get the glitched permission, which is used, like I said, to override and fix M2 and make him believe he is David. End of story. Except no, we gotta address the whole sun and moon thing. Okay, so let's assume that this isn't some sort of cryptic half-truth and it's actually being blunt with us. We fixed the moon and then we became sun and moon, creation and destruction. Absolute dead-on literal creation and destruction, if I may. So let's assume that in this secret half ending, that's likely not canon since you cannot get it on your first playthrough. The only way you can get it is through a magically appearing tiger doll that just happens to be in the office when you start New Game Plus, which could just the same not be taken seriously and is just game mechanics. Of course, it could be canon since it ends with Arnold successfully getting the data driver and the restrained mimic, and as we know, there was a lot of time before Ruin for something to happen. Let's just say that we did hear that right. We became sun and moon. Okay. We'll just pass that little threshold and we'll go from there. So who are we in the game? Well, it boils down to a confusing bunch of characters known as you, us, and R, and 2 keys. Throughout the EXE game, certain toys and objects will talk about different characters. For example, you had a Roxy rodeo hat that you wore all the time. He used to play with a Monty toy. He created a vacuum pet and it was his greatest success and failure. Now, this one is interesting. See, Edwin's father ran the factory and made vacuums. Edwin was the one who made friendly trinkets to help out. So this is likely him, which means that there's 2 he's, because sometimes the he also refers more to David than Edwin, unless, I guess, Edwin really liked that Monty fishing game. And at first you might think with all of the context clues that we are David, but that's actually not the case. All of David's toys refer to him instead of me, you, or us. And halfway through the game, we meet and befriend a baby owl. After helping Mother's son, she gives us a baby owl mask and says that it will convince the sleeping moon that we are him so that we can get by. But the baby owl is now gone. Mother's son smiles and says he flew away. Actually, Pickle Pepper 900 pointed out that the oven kicks on and smells like chicken. So unless Chica's absence is for another reason, this is likely the fate of the baby owl. And it can mean many things. It could mean that Fiona actually was behind David's death. It could also be a symbolization of death like Fiona's, since Fiona's death is also represented by fire. It could be a vague reference to David being cremated, or it could just be like a dark joke. that you came this far to protect the owl and then it died when you had your back turned. Like Edwin's situation with David. There's not really enough evidence to tell, and admittedly, I'm kind of really locked in on the sun and moon thing, so I'm just going to keep going on my original tangent. Later on, we see a baby owl statue, and it says, "You will bring him back, no matter the cost." Interesting that because of the style of narration, this is less like you telling yourself and more like a third party, us and R, telling you that you will do this. You are bringing back David, so you are not David. Are you Edwin? Well, there's actually some context that can support this. Edwin is the moon, and you rebuild a different moon, and through that you rebuild yourself, and then become sun and moon. And while Sun Fiona still appears later, the moon does not. All of this context towards David and Fiona's death could be Edwin's reflection of his life and his regrets. And Edwin is dead, so his spirit or something of it being in a machine of some kind is actually quite plausible. But there's some stuff going against this. First off, you're not Moon, the sleeping moon. At least not in the beginning. You and Edwin are referenced to separately. So perhaps he was you and you didn't know it, and we're seeing a reflection of yourself. That is possible, but it is a little bit of a stretch. But this would also imply that Edwin died, and yet his spirit somehow made it back into the machine at Fiona's guiding. But Fiona doesn't know Edwin is dead. There's only so meta you can go, considering that Fiona herself kind of fourth wall breaks everything at the end. And Fiona does not, as far as we are aware, know that that he exploded. Again, I do think that this is a possibility, but I think we could use some more hints. It could be that this is the employee who got trapped in the basement, possibly as a sleeping moon, but I think that would be elevating that character a lot into a situation that he's not directly involved into. There's also the possibility that the daycare attendant is a mimic themselves. I mean, consider this. They have similar teeth, similar build, the mimic has this thing for jesters and clowns occasionally. It's very possible that somewhere in this web of cogs and oil, an M3 was built and became the sun and moon somehow. Especially since it seems like that's what Fiona wanted. Fiona mentions in the audio logs when she was begging Edwin to build another body to try again, but he refused. So, an M3 circling around isn't too off the table, but it is kind of a pull. And I mean, this does seem very out of left field, but it could also explain why Moon became so connected to the Vanny glitch trap thing if there was this mimic connection. But again, that's a bit of a reach, especially when the point of doing this was to upload these glitch permissions into M2. At that point, there really didn't need to be an M3. Now, this last possibility is very, very silly, but it actually has the most evidence, kind of. And that is that it be Arnold himself. And no, I am not just saying that because he's also voiced by Culling. Culling's practically voicing half of the major cast by now. That's not why I think this. I think it for a few reasons. First off, this is quite literally what Arnold is doing. He is literally playing a game, putting together the pieces to make them mimic David. He is the you, even if we don't know if the in-game context always is you. We at least know that the you at the end from Fiona is directly to the man outside of the game, Arnold. Plus, look what happens in the game after entering the Murray section. You face the same animatronics in the same order that Arnold does. You face it differently, instead showing, happy alternatives where Dolly's helped with work, Chica gets her cupcake, and Jackie gets trapped in a boot where she belongs. But it's still the same order, the same mascot encounters. And even the you will fix David thing is the same as Fiona strong-arming Arnold into helping her, or else he's a dead man. And as for the reward, that would be him living. Even if that's one reward she might not always let him keep. And finally, on the same topic, Arnold's probably dead. Let me put it this way, to get this ending, to get this far, like I said, you have to complete the game at least once, so that the tiger plush will appear in the office. It'd be one thing if this was like an unlockable collectible, but the fact that it's directly in that office where the Tiger Plus shouldn't even be, and how Arnold must finish the game and die to get the New Game Plus, that's pretty cryptic when added to the text game that talks about you being reborn into the sun and the moon. In all likelihood, Arnold's probably dead, either by Mimic killing him, or the van fire caused by his, let me be frank, bafflingly rigged up van heater. And also, total speculation here, but Arnold's behavior actually clicks with Sun specifically. They're both burned out and exhausted, forced to continue going without rest under the thumb of Fazbear Entertainment as a cog in their machine. Arnold's on the brink of passing out, but there's times where you hear that bitterness and frustration, and yeah, that reads exceptionally Sun-like.
No. I almost died again. You need to send help. Get me out of here now. No, I gave it to you. I did everything you told me to.
At least compared to Edwin Murray, I don't think Sun acts enough like Edwin Murray in comparison to Arnold's. You know, I could see that. You feel me? You know. I'm wording it badly, but you know what I'm saying. If any of these people are Sun, it's the stressed out guy. But that's going off of this. I suppose at the end of the day, there's not enough info to tell. All we've got is a singular line, and that line is very loaded, but the context around it makes it too vague to see the light at the end of the tunnel. This is where folks might also say it's a red herring or it means nothing at all, but in this case, this is very deliberate. You'd have to be pretty cruel to put in something as blatant as, "You're the sun and moon now," just for giggles and have it not really mean anything. Not to mention it would be, then, very confusing. So, yeah, there's the origin of the sun and moon. Both in a somewhat obscure character with a big role in the Storytime showcase, a friendly moon man who was a little intimidating but otherwise kindly in marketing, assumedly, one that became part of a terrible tragedy that involved a man likely going crazy and starving to death. And then there's this line that, directly relates to Sun and Moon dropped into a game about tricking a killer robot into believing he's a dead kid. Shockingly, this is entirely on brand for FNAF. Let's be frank, Sun and Moon turning out to be some obscure character who died a long time ago, absolutely, totally in character. For the series, at least. Imagine if Sun and Moon was Arnold and the Basement Man stuck in one body. Nobody's getting any sleep tonight. But that is the end of the road. The wild ride ends with one last question. What if this was the case, and the daycare attendant originated from some sort of situation like this? I mean, how much would it change? It certainly would change him, and whoever he's revealed to be, but would it be a bad change or a good one? I've seen folks more critical about the smart AIs of FNAF, specifically in the situation of, the Glamrocks. Would it make them any better or worse if they were really souls trapped in machines? I think that's worth thinking about, especially with the paradox of how the animatronics became much more human-like and had more personality in the cases where they were mostly artificial. Save baby. It's a thinker. The whole thing is, so that's where we leave it for today. Thanks for watching. Okay, imagine dying in a van fire after dealing with this thing and then waking up in a daycare. Yeah, only Arnold.